all that, but he describes it all in the chapter about Maybalt. So you might want to, if you don't, how many do you have this book, by the way? Oh, almost everybody again. Okay. So, and we have some examples of Maybalt pottery in the museum, in that, you know, the back kitchen area, they call it. But, and they're in a case, and you can see that. And it's very rare and sought after today.
And if you go to Brüssel in Germany, you'll see some that looks almost exactly like ours.
And it was,
Probably made by the Maybalt family.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well,
They have less than we do. They just have a few pieces. But it's
yeah, and my dad wrote that in this book when they would have a chivalry. They would go to him and they'd want all of his pots that didn't turn out so good so they could throw them against the wall of the bride who was getting married, because that's, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what they did, to make noise. And then if they made enough noise, then the parents would let them in so they could have some beer and something to eat, right? Coffee cake. Not beer.
Yeah.
I think beer. Yeah. So that was just a custom. Everybody gathered together and made a lot of noise and threw pots and caused a commotion, and then that was a big celebration the night before the wedding. That, I don't know when that ended, but I know my dad tried to rejuvenate it once when somebody, I think one of the school teachers we had here that we called the Holy Ghost was getting married or something, and he decided we'd give him a chivalry, and they all went over and tried to do that. I don't know how rowdy it got. I didn't go. Anyway, I thought it was, must have been fun enough to keep doing it. Okay, so after that, in the table of contents, which is here, then there's the triple axe murder. Oh, how many of you know about that? Lois does. Don? Okay, so that is, you know, something that probably will never happen again.
Hopefully not.
Let's hope.
I mean, you can hardly
unsolved.
believe it happened in Bergholz. I mean, but it did, and it's all documented, and that story is in here too. And the house that it happened in still exists today in Bergholz, and it was a house, an early home built in 1843 or 4. I'm not sure exactly which, but you know, real long time ago. And I just spoke to the owner who lives there today, and her husband, and that's my sister-in-law, Jan Voelker, and my brother-in-law, Mark. So, and there, she said, well, you know, if anybody wants to come over and don't believe it, when we made our house, remodeled our house in the closets upstairs, or the cubby holes, we didn't do anything with those, and you can open the door and look in and see all the straw and the mud still there. So that was where the triple axe murder took place, and it was all about a doctor who at that time lived there. This was in the I don't know exactly what year, probably 1860s, I'd say. Because I know at first they didn't even have a doctor in Bergholz for a number of years, and then this Dr. Stang came, and he was married, but he and his wife didn't get along, so he left her and came here and got that house and hired a housekeeper, and the housekeeper's daughter also lived there. And then what happened was his wife, she was having an affair with some doctor from Martinsville or something, and he was known as Dr. X because they weren't divulging his name, so I don't know, they just didn't want it to be known, or really no one ever really knew. But they apparently hired some people to knock on the door at night and say that doctor is needed at a certain location because someone's very sick. So he got his doctor stuff and followed them out, and they ended up on Cy Road on the corner of Cy and Jago, and that's where he was attacked with an axe by these men, and they killed him there. And then they went back to the house, and because the housekeeper had seen the guy who came to the door, killed the housekeeper, and then they even went in the bedroom where her 11-year-old daughter Dorothy was sleeping and killed her with an axe too. So that was what happened. And it was just the most tragic thing you can imagine in Bergholz. Wake up the next morning, I think it was a Sunday morning, and hear what had happened. And that house at that time was located on Niagara Rd, and it was right between where my grandpa Winky lived, where Lois lives now, you know, where across from the Bergholz garage, that big white house on the corner, and St. James Church is next to it. And this house I'm talking about was between that house and the Henry Voelker brick house that's down the road right there. So, but now this is the weird thing. Lois, when was it? In probably 20 or so, that they moved that house?
I really don't know for sure. They moved it probably when they were going to, your grandparents, when they were going to build their house, about that time.
And Francis, you mean? And
Yeah.
okay.
That was in about 1927, 26,
okay.
somewhere there.
So I don't know why that house got moved, but they moved it from the location I described on Niagara Road around the corner. So now it's on Roar Street, okay? And that,
Across from the church.
yeah, kind of across from St. James Church, and where the parking lot is now, you know, behind the church, and also the big hall. All right, so that's the story on that, but there's still, you might want to refresh your memory about that and read it again. And I called Jan today and asked her if she would mind if I recounted that and shared and mentioned her name, and she said no, she didn't. Okay. And also, then there's Bergholz between the two wars, World War I and World War II. That was when my dad grew up in Bergholz, so he describes a lot of things that happened in those years, and a lot of interesting characters, and just you know, the stores that were there. The Henry Hoyer's hardware store, I remember that too, and just a lot of memories. And he mentions people too, like Charlie Conrad, who was kind of the local drunk. I shouldn't say that, but he was. Everybody.
My dad had to walk him home many a night.
Yes, okay. But he was always the happy guy, though.
Yes,
Gotta say, you know, but
he was always singing.
yes, he was.
It was our first taste of movies or excitement in the town.
What's that?
Henry Hoyer, didn't he have movies and stuff and shows?
Oh, I don't know, did he?
Didn't you remember that?
No. I didn't get to go if he did.
Anybody else remember that?
Well, what year would this
Well, it
be?
happened. They charged a dime. I don't know what they charged, but he had, you know, shows and stuff.
Where would you sit somewhere?
Oh, yeah.
Where?
Well, there was an open store, so, you know, at the bottom, so we had set up chairs.
Really?
Oh, my gosh. Am I the oldest one here? Yeah, and that was, such a wonderful thing to see that we had never seen before. There
Like
was
cartoons or what?
well, that and some shows we had too, and that was, wow, you know?
Oh my goodness, I
Yeah.
never heard that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for letting me know. My grandparents lived right across the street. They never said anything. I guess
I'll find out.
Wow. Okay, so that's, oh, I don't know, I wanted to mention one other thing about this. The Devontiers, they got here because of, a guy named, whose last name was Salinger, Johann Salinger, and he was very rich, wealthy man, and he was very kind, and he helped the settlers who didn't have much. And he built a house. He bought I don't know how many, almost 100 acres, where the Devontier, well, like for the Oppenheim Park area.
Right.
Yes, all that was all his. But he said if anybody would come with, he didn't have any children, and his wife wouldn't come with him, so she stayed back in Prussia. And he came here and he asked any of his nephews if they want to come, that he would eventually give them the farm that he bought. So this one nephew, who happened to be Wilhelm Johann Devontier, 21 years old, he said he accepted the offer, okay? And so he came along to Wheatfield, and then 4 years later, this William Johann Devontier married Charlotte Gerst, and from them are descended all the Devontiers in western New York. So,
Yeah, he met her on the same ship. The two of them came on the same ship together. You see the ship records,
oh yeah,
the Devontier
Little hanky
and
panky
his
going
former
on.
wife,
Just a bit.
they do come together in the same ship.
I didn't know that. Okay, so Salinger built a large manor home on that land, and then he gave that to this Devontier, and then Salinger built the house where my grandpa Winky actually ended up having his homestead, which is on the corner of Kielga and Luther in Bergholz, and that house is still there also. And that's where Salinger built another home after he gave up the other one to the Devontier boy. And it was the first brick building in Bergholz, and it had 2 chimneys, and it was, I don't know, my dad describes it awesome, a gable roof and whatever. It doesn't have the chimneys anymore, but it's still the same structure, and it has like a stucco coating on it now.
Which structure is that?
It's on the corner of Luther and Kielga. So if you go south on Luther Street after the church, go south. If you're heading to where my dad lived, if you think of that, okay, and where I used to live. And then there's Kielga there, that's the first street after the creek. And then it's right there in the corner of Kielga and Luther. Okay, can you picture it? Just drive down there and you'll see.
Yeah, we don't drive.
Okay.
I know Ruth had, the Devontier housing is still in Germany, and we had a coffee and kuchen with Lieschen Devontier.
Oh, really?
Devontier, yes.
Uh-huh.
And she lived, I think, at least to about 100. She's
Wow.
gone now, but we had
Yeah.
coffee and cake with
Oh,
her.
wonderful. And I should mention too that this Johann Salinger, after he spent a year or so here, he went back to get his wife. She would lose all her inheritance because she was wealthy too if she came here. So that's why she didn't come with him. But they missed each other so much that he went back to get her. And then she finally agreed to. He threw a little pebble up to her window, and she said, "Who goes there?" And he says, "Salinger." And then she looked down, and it was him. And she didn't even know he was coming all the way from America back to see her. And then he convinced her to come with him, and so then she lived with him in Bergholz. So they had a happy ending. Yeah, I couldn't just leave her stranded in Prussia without him. Okay, so I'm going to leave that book because I actually really like this book the most because I can relate to things more in it. But
Ruth,
what?
should mention something. I was in Audubon in
Audrey Mueller and Norman Walks wedding. I was just a little girl.
Uh-huh,
And they had the shivaree the night before. And it was at the barn, at the end of the Norman Walks barn. And I can remember, because I was just little, we had coffee cake, and that was a big thing for me, but they had beer. So they had the men had the beer and the noise, and I had coffee. And I thought that was cool. And I was just a little girl.
were you afraid or was it fun?
No, it was fun.
Yeah,
It was fun.
were there other kids there too?
Well, Jamie DuBois, she was the smallest. She was a little flower girl. I was 12, and then of course Audrey's sister, Marilyn, she was in the wedding also.
Yeah.
And no, but I can remember the good coffee.
So you said Jane DuBois was there?
Mhm.
The one I just talked about, the arm
A
wrestler?
little Jane. Little. So this
Wow.
is a long time ago.
I'll have to mention that to her.
That was a relative.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Okay, well, I gotta get back to my price list. The next book is by Kyra Karsten Woodruff. And she was the granddaughter of Anna, who the story is written about. And this is a really interesting book too. And you would enjoy reading this. I did too. And so well, I gotta read this part too. She says, I, Anna Hubner, who had lived these 28 years doing just as I pleased, was giving this up to be married. Doing just this had appealed to me, and I had enjoyed it. But this peaceful life of drifting along with the tide was not what God had created me for. My two brothers-in-law told me of this man who lost his wife and had small children to care for. I felt that when he asked me to be his wife and mother to his children, this was a divine call. Here was a place in the world where I could use the healthy mind and body that God had given me. Fred Zastro was married to my sister Rose, and August Zastro was married to my sister Louise. I secretly wondered if Fred and Gus Zastro were trying to marry me off, so that I would not be a disgrace to the family being an old maid. I had only met Heinrich Karsten on one occasion, and he asked me to be his wife. That quick. Something within me, over which I seemed to have no power, said, yes, even now, I have no regrets for that decision. So this is all based on her diary and what she wrote, and then her great-granddaughter had it published. This is what happened. A knock at the door, which broke the trend of thought to my musings. My father went to the door, and I heard Heinrich say in fine German, I am Heinrich Karsten. I have come for Anna. And so she went with him, and they got married that same night. And he took her out of Johnsburg and to
Wilson.
Wilson, where they
Yeah, they
lived
grew up in Wilson, yeah.
happily ever after. And she had 5 children to care for that were already his, and then they had 2 more together.
Fred Zastro was my husband's uncle, and I've got a wedding picture of someone from that part of the family. I keep it under a mattress to keep it nice.
Wow. Well, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to mention that on page 196, right here, is a picture of Wayne Jago, the pastor, and he's shaking hands with Paul Karsten, who was Anna's son. Okay, so
Is that the one that owned the farm next door?
I don't know.
Paul is their brother.
Huh?
Paul Carson is their
John, do you
brother.
know?
Yeah.
Not sure.
Is
There was
whose
a Carson
brother?
that owned her.
Paul Karsten is whose brother?
Ira's brother.
Oh, Ira. Okay. Well, I don't know all these people that well,
Read
but
the book.
Well, I
Gotta
moved
read the
down
book.
from Wilson when I
Well,
down
that's
there.
where the dealer was.
Their dad had a tractor dealership, and then Paul took it over later. Corner Chestnut and, Corner Chestnut and Beebe Road.
yes, that's where they live, Beebe Road. I just want to say she lived from 1879 to 1959. Okay, her name was Anna Hubner Carson, so her maiden name was Hubner.
That book is interesting because she talks a little bit about St. John's.
Yes, yes, she did.
My dad and I really wanted to know where their farm was on Ward Road before they moved to Wilson. And my dad and I were able to find from an old map, and then he remembered an old farmhouse there from when he was just a little kid in the early 20s.
Yeah,
And but she writes a little bit about going to school, walking from there up Ward Road to going to school up at school here.
yeah, well, she talks about that in the book, so, if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. And it also reminds me, my dad's mother came from, Johnsburg, grew up in Johnsburg, so she was, was around the same age, so I always think maybe she really knew her too, She sounds like a real interesting woman, and she tells all about her life every day, what happened. And, okay, we're almost to the end. Next one is Confessional Lutheran Migrations to America. That's this book right here. And this one, it was published a while back. I'll read it to you. In 2018, the Historical Society of North German Settlements is reprinting Confessional Lutheran Migrations to America, 150th anniversary, 1988, to commemorate the 175th anniversary of our ancestors' migration from Prussia to America. Permission for the reprint has been granted by the Eastern District of Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. So they printed it first, and 1988, and then there weren't any around anymore, and it was too important of a book to just let go. So our society took on the job of reprinting it and make it available again today. And my dad wrote 7 of the 12 chapters in here, and it's all it tells here what it is. Originally published by the Eastern District, a collection of 12 essays by ministers and scholars regarding the mid-19th century Prussian migration to America. So a lot, especially like pastors are really interested in. It tells all about the church, all the different churches and their issues and where
Can
they
I say
settle.
something on that?
Yeah, sure.
Still grab this. The thing that's, I find really fascinating in this is there's
Oh, yeah.
there's a map in the back
I meant to mention that too.
that's color coded. And this is if you're like, you want to know more about the overall German emigration during the 1800s. Because it does talk about the Wends, W-E-N-D-S, and how they came over and settled in Texas. And then the ones that came through this area but went to Minnesota, the ones that went to Wisconsin.
So it's not just this area,
So
but
it's-
all
yeah.
of America.
So it's where the old Lutherans sort of all ended up. So,
And, it was all part of God's plan to get people to know Him and to know the Lutheran faith, and that's what happened. Okay, so that is not the very last book. Now we have the Little Plattdeutsch Dictionary, and that is this one, which I mentioned a little bit before, and this just has all the words that you could think of and then how to say them in Plattdeutsch. So you could actually teach yourself how to speak Plattdeutsch if you wanted to, if you studied it enough. And it's just fun to look at it and read it and try to say the words the way our ancestors said them. And we just ordered more of these, so we do have more available now. And I'll read to you what they wrote in the front, which is why they wrote it. May this compilation of commonly used words motivate all Plattdeutsch speakers to explore and expand the precious gift given by our forefathers, a gift that tells us much about our ancestors' lifestyles and their native land and how it was preserved here in our hearts, homes, and memories. So, that's it. And does anybody have anything they want to add or say or comment on? Think about it a little bit.
I'll say something. I was in Salt Lake City and I went to the Mormons, to the genealogy center, and literally I probably spent 40 hours there because we were staying at Park City. My husband would drive me in and drop me off.
Wow.
After you go through a little presentation, you know, half an hour or so, and then you buy a $10 or so to use the copy machine, all that stuff. And it's funny because my husband and I used to go visit Eugene at his house.
Oh, you did? What's your name?
My maiden name was Walk, my grandparents are Wentz, and then my mom's side are Beckons.
Oh.
But anyways,
And what's your first name?
Patricia, Patty, Patty. So anyways, when I was at the genealogy center, Eugene, if he was listening to me, thank you, because I would do the microfiche and have these books with me and go up to like the second and third floor, take out the files, load them, see the ship lift, the ships, the lists, everything, check mark, dog, everything was matching in those books, everything.
Well, he didn't do anything halfway.
Right, but everything, I was like, oh, thank you, Eugene, another check mark. But I was just amazed that the trust that the Mormons put in you for you to go up there, do that, and put those microfiche back, because if you misfiled one, you could misfile like forever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If somebody were to
It'd be
try to
lost.
find something, I mean, just a huge, unbelievable, huge libraries. And everything in there was like, you know, everything. I couldn't believe it. But my purpose was to do more research on my mom's side, because I think I got to like 3 of her grandparents, and then I get to a standstill always on her side. But it is everything. Thank you, Eugene.
That's
You know?
good.
Okay, well, that's nice to hear.